I'm Adam Jennings, and this is Awaiting Approval, a podcast about the messy human side of creative leadership. Today I'm joined by Lou Maxon, ECD at Maxon House, previously leading teams for Thrive Global, BMW, and many more, for a relaxed, two-way conversation about his journey, the lessons he's learned, and what it takes to lead with creativity and honesty. Lou, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Awesome to be here.
Great to have you. I want to start us off nice and light and nice and easy. So for people to kind of get to know a little bit more about you before we dig into your work. So if we were doing this in person, if we were meeting to record this in person, where would you take me and what drink would you order?
Okay. You may not like the drink. So we would probably most likely be meeting at my house, which is also home of my studio, which is outside of my house. Oddly enough, about 110 feet from my house, I have a railroad track that goes from our house out into the forest, and that's where my studio is on a kinetic rail car. So we'd probably be meeting out in the rail car upstairs in the library, or maybe somewhere, some chairs set outside in the woods. And most likely you'd find me drinking a Mountain Dew, which I know that they have in other countries, but I'm not sure it has the same potent ingredients as are allowed in the United States. I was over in London for a multi trip for a stop motion campaign, and the producer had to track me down a Mountain Dew because they don't really sell it like they do here, and it doesn't have the same ingredients, so it tastes kind of more like a Sprite or a 7-Up. So yeah, that would be the drink of choice, but of course you can pick your own.
I am there. I got so hooked on Mountain Dew, especially when it became a sort of running gag when I was doing a big stint over at Fantasy Interactive, because it was the thing that fueled me, the Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
And recently, when my partner and I traveled across the States, I hadn't realized the range of Mountain Dew, because like you say, over in the UK, Mountain Dew is just pretty much one flavor, Sprite.
Yeah.
But in the States, it's like blueberry and cherry, and all these kind of flavors that you can. Right, exactly. But then there's all these flavors that are like fireworks or autumn leaf, or like some like completely amazing ones. So I will absolutely join you. So I'll metaphorically raise a bottle of Mountain Dew to cheer you on for this recording. Keeping it kind of light, simple. When was the last time you used pen and paper?
Oh, I mean, this morning. So I have these roll-on notebooks. They look like the Lufthansa brand, like graphically on the outside. It's very Swiss. But I get them at this bookshop I go to almost like once a week, if not twice, in Seattle, called Peter Miller, and it's an architecture and design bookstore. And I get these notebooks, and I use like a skinny Sharpie, and every day that I'm in my studio, basically I'll fill the page of the day with just check marks, like every line of all the things I've got going on or things that are coming. And then at the same bookshop, I also got these set of Corbusier, the architect, metal stencils of like numbers and letters. And when I have breaks in the day, I'll either sketch in the notebook or I'll just trace in stencils. And sometimes the stencils they're very thin metal stencils, and sometimes they'll get stacked on top of each other, so like an A and a Z or a 1 and a 8, and I'll just stencil the combination of them. Everything in my office, except for the phone that we're having this conversation on, is really analog, and the office is really about leaving a little bit of reality behind. And this is the place where we imagine futures, right, for clients. And so I find that I like to be surrounded by physical things. I work on a MacBook, and I don't have like an iMac or a gigantic screen. I think back in the day I used to work like on a desktop with a bigger screen, when everything, when the outcome of everything was like more print based or video. Now, like I said, really it's just I work on my MacBook, and so when I'm done, the phone that we're talking on is on a little stand, and that stand is sitting on a cutting mat. And next to the cutting mat, I've got an X-Acto knife and ruler and T-squares. And so I like to have that physical reminder of the analog with me every day.
Love that. I really love that. And it's funny, I was recording another episode this morning, and with that guest, we were talking about how much more satisfying it is on a to-do list to physically strike a pen through each item and how there was something about that tactile nature. But I love that you're surrounding yourself with the analog in order, like you put it beautifully, surrounding yourself in the analog whilst you're there to envisage the future for your clients. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, we have folks come out and visit, whether clients come out and visit the studio or folks come out to visit the house and the train. And I've got a lot, like a separate notebook. This actually is very kind of like a long and skinny notebook from a manufacturer in Japan. And I log every single time I move my studio from the house out to the forest and back, and who was on it with me, and I started doing it more because I wanted to make sure if there was like a place along the track that was a little bit more bumpy, or that I could write notes and send it back to the team that I worked with when the studio was built. But I've kept it to this day. Like every single time I move it, I stamp the date. I think part of the studio is about actually not going fast, right? It's about going slow. And there's a little folly to it, which is it's not a long track. It's not a long journey from out to here, and it's only like a couple miles an hour. And so it's not actually about getting to the end the soonest. It's sort of just about taking a pause. Even if I'm going back to the house to get a snack or use the restroom, it's sort of about stopping and seeing things sort of go by slowly. And I think it's a good reminder that there are deadlines, but there's not a repeatable pace to our work. Sometimes the discoveries happen in between, and very rarely do the ideas come when you sit down. You don't sit down at the chair at the desk and like, okay, the ideas, come on. A lot of times it'll be if I stop along the track, get off, maybe go for a little walk, or my dog comes out. Or so usually when I'm in here, it's because something has already happened and I'm ready to activate, on that. I know you have posted or shared about the Rick Rubin book, but it's just about having your antenna up always and being ready to like receive something, to then and then sometimes you activate on it, sometimes you don't, and it may pass and it may go to someone else. But I think just having the antenna up and being out here in the woods, in the forest, and literally being like on a journey every day on this sort of adult train set allows me to kind of see everything and kind of figure out what I want to chase after.
I think that's possibly one of the most beautiful versions of that idea, or that sort of often quoted thing of it's the journey that matters. That's what life is about, the journey. And I think the way you're putting that it's in those pauses where we find the answers to things. And I think that's really beautiful. And I also love the idea, the absolute sort of lunacy of the idea of saying, right, I'm going to go and sit in my thinking chair and the idea will come to me because I'm in my thinking chair. I think that's great. And I love that. That brings me really nicely, like, with this idea of it's the journey that matters. I would love to know if you could go right back to the beginning of your career and just give us a sort of bullet point of from the very first job you had through to the first CD position you had, and then from the first CD position to where you are now.
Yeah. I don't know that the first. So I've like you, I've been doing this a long time, and sometimes I think, and I've been doing it to a different scale. When I first started, my goal, and even back to high school, was like that in the U.S. like 9th through 12th grade. Some friends at a private Jesuit school in Seattle wanted to start this alternative newspaper because the school didn't offer really publication or a regular cadence of a newspaper. They knew that I had enough. They knew that I had the skills to help them sort of like produce it. Really, I mean, I wouldn't say that was a job. I didn't get paid for it. But that was like the hint of danger that I felt from doing design work, kind of like on the edge without a net. And then that led to like working on like college newspaper publication, advertising. And then one of my first like actual jobs was I was in New York on an internship, and I was living in a dorm with some other students from New York, and they were heavily into like at that time, I guess this is like 1994, 95, they were heavily into like underground music scene in New York. So like they were asking me to design flyers at like the Palladium in New York for their shows. And I don't even think they paid me for it. I got to go. But like that was really the first taste that I had something that someone needed. And in exchange for that, there was a different compensation, I guess, other than money. But my first like paid graphic design job was I was like a page designer, editorial designer at the Village Voice in New York. And then I started on the publication side. So my goal from that high school experience was I wanted to work for a magazine, not a newspaper. And so my career started in New York at the Village Voice and then Time Out New York. And so I worked my way up the ladder on the editorial side. And then magazines were sort of starting to discover branded content. And so there were publishers that were creating publications for brands. Like Time Out had a partnership with Penguin, and they did travel books. And so I sort of migrated from editorial storytelling design over to branded content and then into the, deep dark hole that is advertising. But really came out the other side, into the world of like brand storytelling, which I'd argue that I've been doing since the beginning. And to this day, like that's what I spend, a majority of my time doing is solving these problems for brands or solving these challenges for brands. And, I get hired. It's funny. I get hired by agencies. I get hired by startups. I get hired by in-house brands. And I've worked in all those different environments. So I think the important thing is you sort of know when you're in-house what the empathy to the in-house team is. They always feel like the agency gets the juicy work. So having worked on both sides of that, you can, to your point, like you can be a better leader because you've been subjected to some of those scenarios and you can kind of help a team navigate through. And my sense is I don't really care if it's an agency or if it's in-house or it's a startup, right? You have to set the creative bar, you have to establish the culture, and then you have to be a champion for the work. And then I guess like in a sports, I heard this yesterday. It was really interesting. I play hockey, ice hockey, and they were interviewing a player from the NHL about why he liked a specific coach. And he said, I like the coach because all the other coaches just yell at the players as a way to motivate them. But this specific coach is actually interested in helping me as a player, develop as a player. And whether we win or lose, like obviously that's important because the coach will lose their job if we don't win. But I feel that this specific coach, even though they don't have as much experience or are paid as much as the other coaches in the league, like this coach is invested in me. And I think our job, no matter the environment we're in, is to help people in their creative career, right? And if they do great things and eventually move on, I think as a leader that you've done a good job if that person stays in touch with you and continues that relationship, whether it's a mentoring relationship. But I think we're here to do great work, but sometimes our work isn't the work. It is actually the people. Like some of my best projects, I think, are projects where people have discovered what they're capable of. And then I'll say that one of the best outcomes of this profession is that sometimes you get a job or a project or you go to a place and it turns out to be kind of it's sort of like not what was promised, but you meet someone at that place that then it's sort of like the train is moving and they get on at that station and that journey may not be great for the project, but that person's traveling with you, into the future. And I look back in the rearview mirror and think about the place. I don't think so much about the work, but who I met at that place and like how that person kind of moved forward. So that's kind of how I see it. And maybe because we have some years on us, that's as important, as the work. And with things changing and, the volume of work has changed, but I think the values are there.
Absolutely. And you're not the first person, that I've had this conversation with, either as a result of recording these episodes for awaiting approval, but also just in general. You're not by far the first sort of experienced design leader to say the work is actually the people. And as you know from conversations we've had in the past, but also things that I put out there. My approach to leadership is very much human to human. Whether you're talking about your team members or your leadership or your clients or whatever it might be, we're all human. We'll have the same sort of goals and dreams and visions and challenges and what have you. And when you start to recognize that, I think then the path to lead to a better outcome, whatever that outcome might be, whether that's the work, whether it's the return, whether it's the growth of a team member, when you start to recognize, hey, we're all the same, I think that sort of unlocks things, it frees things up. But I love that you come to that, because when you think about that bullet point that you gave us, from the beginning to where you are now, if you could pick one point in time where you could go back to yourself at that age, but knowing what you know now, when would you go and what would you say to yourself?
Gosh, I think and maybe I don't know if it's so much school that like beats this into you, or maybe it's when you get out of school, or maybe it's probably there were a couple moments where, you start making like job or project or work decisions based on money, right? Or based on the brand, and like, oh gosh, like I've always wanted to work for this brand. It's a big brand. This will be great to have, And I've done that. I've been through that, like the myth, because I I I got the opportunity to work on some of that really, really early, either through uh, fortune, luck, hard work, whatever. I'm a timing mix of things, but I also made some decisions to leave places for less money but more opportunity early, and those were the moments that actually made my career. I think early on, because I think there's this thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to get out of school, I'm going to go work for Coca-Cola, or I'm going to go work for a car company, and then you get in there and you realize that at some of the bigger brands, you can put the logo on your website, but that brand has reached sort of like its maturity, and then now it's sort of just it's like a cruise ship. It's very slow moving to change, and you're there to sort of like nuance and slightly tune an existing thing versus something that may not be as high of fee, but has, like it's like the tender that's small and can whip around the ship, and it's not going to feel the pain of a failed decision or a chance or a risk like that ship is. The ship hits something in the water and the whole thing can go down, super quickly. So I think for me, I think it was early, and I would go back to myself and say, like, early on, chase the opportunity. Don't be enamored with the sort of like scale of things, because you always do get a chance to work on those. And later in life, like I've worked on really big brands, and still it's about the people. You can work with the greatest brand in the world, but if you are working on a team with people who are just like jerks or idiots, or they're not, they're sort of just like going through the motion, then touching that big brand doesn't really matter, right? um you know up, up, as like every person that's attached to these brands is that brand. Like, so if I go out and I'm like, oh gosh, I really love Mountain Dew, and then I go work on Mountain Dew and the person I'm working with, is rubbish, then that sort of frames now my experience with that brand and that product, and I think it's, as it's rare. Like sometimes I will avoid a category because I have a passion for that brand or product, and I don't want to, mess it up. Like I don't want to leave that project and not like that thing anymore. And when you go behind the curtain and you see, you know, like one bad apple can really screw up your, emotional connection to that brand. I think with agencies, it's like we've all seen all the agencies. We've seen the small ones, the medium, the ones that say they're not, the non-agency, the big Goliaths. And I was laughing with a colleague of mine the other day, and we were just like, from the first time I worked at an agency to having worked on this big project recently, I'm like, it really hasn't changed, in like 20 years.
Yeah.
Whether they have the cool office or the Friday half days, or the this or the that, or all this sort of fabricated cultural things. It really comes down to, how did that agency cast the people that are chosen to work there? And are they like good human beings? Are they just going through the motions, or do they actually have a care for the work? And do they have a care for each other? And how do they treat people who don't work there full time that are brought on? As a lot of times the agencies are weighted with like super senior talent, and then there's a huge gap to the junior. And then I found, for me, where I have like a real focus on design craft, like that the sort of ad agencies, craft is missing. I mean, it's not just missing at agencies, it's missing. And I find myself now working, I think because of the technology, I may be like, for instance, I'm working on a project today with someone who's like literally fresh out of school, who's not even in design, like someone who's in like a completely different discipline in marketing, who's going to be, like the person that's expressing the thing I've been working on. And it's not like their day-to-day job, but because of like the resourcing, like that's the person that's going to be like cutting and editing this thing. And for me, because I came up not through the conventional channels, it doesn't bother me as much. And I think I'm one of those people that says, like, here's sort of my idea, here's the storyboard, here's the feeling of it, but here's the opportunities where I want that person to make their impact, right? Because I've identified the ingredients, but I'm not telling that person like these ingredients make this always, right? It's up to that person to interpret my direction, but also put themselves into the work and work together to make something that I couldn't have made. I saw this, oh gosh, it was like 2 days ago. I think someone was interviewing Tom Cruise, and he was saying, with Mission Impossible coming out and everything, and he was saying, they were asking him about giving advice, and to filmmakers, he said, my advice is, spend time with the editor, spend time with the person doing the color grading, spend time with the production person, learn as much as you possibly can about every single aspect of anything that you'll work on, that all these people will be working on and touching. And the more you know about those things, the better you can direct them, because you will know where the edge is for that person and for the technology, and you will know how to best provide direction, but also best get something out of that person that maybe other people haven't even asked the question. In aspects of design outside of like what we do, but like architecture, you may have someone that does, concrete work, and they're doing concrete work on, highways, or they're doing it on, sewage systems, but they bring a level of craft to even something that other people may not think is craft in an application where it's not a typical design. And if you ask that person, wow, could you take what you've done over here and do it in a house or in something else, I think it's like, just a lot of people never get asked. They don't get the chance. And I think if you can understand their craft or their trade and sort of like translate that to something, a lot of the most amazing people I've worked with, I would say, are not really categorized as, design craft, but they have it in them. They're not asked. So I think establishing that relationship with them and giving them a shot, I think we all got a shot at different points in our career, and someone took a huge risk, right? Um, so that's kind of where my mind is with that.
There's a couple of things in there that were really powerful, and I think a lot of feels like the sort of connective tissue that runs through everything that you just spoke about was authenticity. Finding the authentic moments, for you when you were like, well, okay, I'm going to give up a high paid job here to go somewhere for less money, but it feels like the right move. It feels like this is where I'm meant to go. And there's an authentic kind of connection with yourself in that. And then also that idea of being able to understand a team member's role in a sort of adjacent discipline, so that you can communicate with them and show an understanding that they will appreciate, that unlocks that collaboration a little bit more and makes it freer, because you're not just then this CD sat on your throne saying, go make this better. You're actually down in the weeds with them saying, I get why that's going to be really difficult to do. How can we figure out together a different way of doing this. You know, you're the expert in this, but I've got some knowledge here about what you're doing. I get it. I understand why this is difficult. You know, how can we find a better solution? How can we find a better resolution? And that, I feel like that's all comes down to that kind of authentic approach of, I don't know everything, but I want to learn, right? I want to understand and learn.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Hi. If what you're hearing is resonating with you, where you are in your leadership journey right now, stay tuned until the end. I'll share details on how you can work directly with me to level up your creative leadership.
For sure.
When you think about everything that you've worked on, all those big brands, all the little ones, the people that you've worked with, could you pick out one thing, one piece of work or project that you're most proud of?
That's a tough one. There's one I'm super proud of because it wasn't one that I thought would be how it turned out when I started, which is often the way, right? Like sometimes, to that comment about like chasing the big brands, and sometimes the client you meet, you're like, oh gosh, you kind of like premeditate the outcome based on sort of like what you see. Sometimes, you know, in a good way, people surprise you. I was doing like a lot of branding projects. Gosh, this was probably now like 5 or 10 years ago, but there was this woman who was referred to me, and she'd created this startup, and it was in like consumer packaged goods, and it was these cookies that would help nursing moms. It would enhance their like the output of milk that they're giving to their child. It was basically like a cookie that enhanced the like breastfeeding for their child. And she was in a group of moms. They have like these groups that I don't know if it's the hospital sets up, where it's like a support group for moms that have kids to help like answer questions. And she was in a group, and someone had suggested an ingredient to try to help increase milk production, basically, right? I mean, something that I would never, not medically qualified to even have a say on this, or B, not something that it's not Mountain Dew, right? So anyway, so she came to me, and the assignment was to help her name the company, create the branding. The packaging was going to be critical because that was really most people would see the packaging in the store, and then help support like the launch and ongoing. We went through like I have this questionnaire. It's like 10 questions. Through the questions, over my career, I've sort of modified and tuned it, and I customize it depending on the client and the category. But she had basically answered one of the questions in the survey, and she just said, like, a lot of my competitors in this space, they create sort of like almost like a medicinal product that if you would go into the grocery and you'd find it under like in the health food aisle. So by virtue, a lot of it had kind of like that look to it. And she said, look, like the connection of with a child going through that process and helping like literally nourish the child, like that is a special thing, right? And I was, total respect. And she's like, I don't want to create a brand that sort of is ashamed of that moment. Like I want this brand to celebrate, not to hide, right? And so from that insight, we carried on, and the name of the brand was Milk Makers, and literally the logo, Adam, I kid you not, is like an M with two nipples at the, and I was like laughing with her that I felt like I was getting paid to draw something I probably drew in like the fifth grade. Ironically, because I also worked on McDonald's. I worked on McDonald's extensively. And ironically, first it was difficult from a trademark, because it's an M. Anything that's an M, McDonald's, when something is filed, they look at. But we got it through. And she's like, I want this brand to be celebrated. I want moms to put a sticker on their car. I want them to put a sticker on their diaper bag. I'm sure you know this. Like a lot of clients would be like, oh my gosh, I want my brand to be like Apple, or, but Apple can be like Apple because because Apple behaves like Apple, right? Like a lot of clients want to be something else, but they can't actually be that because it's not true, like in your words, like it's not authentic to not only their product or their service, but to them. Like they don't behave or perform that way, or they're not willing to sort of behave in a consistent manner like those brands do.
Mm.
So in this case, she was living it, like those values and those insights came from her. So we created everything, packaging, and then eventually, like it took off, like it blew up, and eventually it was not a project I just did to like get her going, but like I worked with her for 4 or 5 years, and then eventually a brand in the United States, which sells like sippy cups for little kids and like baby type products. They bought it. They acquired her. And when she was going through that process, one of the things that they talked about was that like there's a lot of products similar to hers in the market. But the difference was is for milk makers was that this was a brand that aligned with their brand. Like they saw the joy that she wanted to celebrate with this product. And I think oftentimes like what brand really is the margin between commodity and the specialness that you've built into it. And as always happens, like, they take, they acquired the brand and then they started changing the packaging and they start, pushing their branding into it. And you're like, but um, it was an unexpected surprise for me because it's the story I'm telling now after having worked on Lexus and all these other, brands. And I think it's because I love working directly with founders. I love working with people who like they had this spark and they need my help to get their story and build a world around what they're trying to do. And I think it proves like it doesn't really matter if the brand gets acquired or sold or whatever, or the scale of it. But like in this case, she was making something that was actually truly helping human beings, in this case, babies, right? She was doing it in a way that wasn't what everybody else was doing, which is like kind of a health product that looked like a health product. And she had fun, enjoyed doing it. And she brought a lot of help, to a lot of women, honestly, and to a lot of babies, and the branding and the storytelling and the photography celebrated the connection between a mom, and her child, right? So it was, we talk about like, gosh, like we hope this brand is actually not evil and not doing something bad and is actually helping humans. And often, so many times, we have to sort of like pick one of those things.
Right.
Uh, but in this case, she was a wonderful person doing a wonderful thing. Yes, it makes money and yes, it's a business, but it doesn't have to be gigantic for it to be gigantic. Like it doesn't have to be in Times Square for it to be memorable. So I think for me that's one I tell, and it's one I still put in my book, because I think it helps when I go talk to someone who's at the very beginning and they're a little lost about where they can go and what I can do. And it was a project that touched a lot of aspects of what I can do with clients, from like naming, branding, design, storytelling, PR. You know, to me, if you create something fantastic, it has embedded reach. A lot of people
Yeah.
go in thinking like, oh, I just need a viral idea, but they don't create something that actually is worthy of spreading, because it's not actually holistically authentic. It's like all the ingredients of it aren't either thoughtful or people would care about. And I think if you do it well, people will talk about it, And if it's different, not just different to be different, but different because, like we talked about, the behavior of that brand can actually activate that difference, then, projects, you have hope for these projects. And it doesn't take much for a project to go, like, you could be almost to the station and then he goes off the rails. So when they
Yeah.
come through, when they come through all the way, it's like a little bit of a miracle.
I know exactly what you mean. And that's I would love to flip that question now. And I promise I'll flip back the other way again afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
But what what one thing comes to mind as something that did come off the rails, that you had a big sort of aha moment, or that you learned from what might be classed as a mistake?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's been a few, right? I think we all we we all have. I think a lot. I won't mention like the specific brand, but it was. So I worked on I worked on a few like products in the health and wellness space, and a few of those brands I was at like really early, like first 10 people or even first three or four. And then in some cases, a couple of them were acquired by really large global companies. And usually I can see, especially now later, you don't see it as much when you're starting, but later on in life, in your career, you see when something gets acquired, or you hear like, oh, like we're going out to investors because we want to grow, right? Okay, I've heard that a million times. And when people say nothing's going to change, like they don't know, like they haven't been through it, so they have their blinders on. And I don't know I don't know so much that in this case, like this specific project was a failure because of something that went wrong and something we created, so much as how it evolved went completely off the rails. Like it was it was basically storytelling for like an employee population who was experiencing this like service and like the health. It was basically it's helping people you can imagine it's not Amazon, one of the largest retail shopping in America, their employee population, helping them with like making better choices about fitness and food and family and money so that they could optimize their paycheck, they could, have a better relationship with their kids, so on. So anyway, so the whole brand was built on stories, like almost like editorial stories. So instead of, if I took you, I would say, okay, Adam wants out of this brand product, he wants to, optimize his, you're working at this store and you don't have predictable schedules. You may work 4 hours one day, you may work, and so they had a product that basically they could sort of balance out all your pay and give you kind of a steady paycheck to rely on. I mean, they take a percentage out of your paycheck to sort of give, so you're not like living paycheck to paycheck, or you don't know. They sort of take the average of it. And so you can count on a paycheck to pay your bills and whatever. And instead of doing like a flyer with like a little inset of your mug and like bullet points, it was like literally we created a team. A lot of the team came from the editorial world, like the magazine or like journalists before brand journalists. And someone would either most often would pick up the phone and they would have a conversation with you, and they'd interview you like, we're going to tell us a story about Adam. And then we would send a photographer out and sometimes a videographer, and so it'd be like a full page, and it would be like a portrait of you with some negative space, and there would be like maybe 500 words, and it would be a story about a little miniature story about your life and how the things that you've chosen to like optimize from this service the that the company you work for is bringing you through the brand I was working with is helping you in your life, right? And anybody who got a story written about him was eligible to win, to be like selected by like a board to win like a cash prize. So for some people, they're not making a lot of money, right? You're in a small market, you're on a retail salary. If you win 10 grand, like that's life-changing money. So we built this whole thing on a network of photographers and videographers and writers around the country. We had done like physical books that had like 250 pages with everybody's story. And when the brand got purchased, it was really purchased because of the stories. But when the brand got absorbed, the first thing that the brand that bought it did was it got rid of all the stories. It got rid of sending a photographer out to like a small town and in the South to and for someone who gets their picture taken, who's never had their picture taken or never been felt like a hero, it's not just removing resources and and sort of sizing the people down to like thumbnails with bullet points. We never said, hey, we're looking to create a community, but what happened was it created a community because people would be like, they'd go to work and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I read your story, it was so inspiring. I was on the edge about thinking about signing up for this free thing, and it really pushed me over the edge to do it, and now I'm doing it, and like you saw someone else at this other store. So I think like storytelling, when done right and properly resourced, can help those things. And when companies are like, hey, we can do an AI portrait, or hey, we can do this, or hey, we don't need a writer, we'll just like, you just like fill out a survey and write your name and submit it. Well, then immediately the failure is that the thing that made the brand special, that was paid for, and the thing that it was turned into, like you've translated it from a great value in a brand that people have a emotional connection into, a commodity. Like, so it went the opposite direction of milk makers. We started with real people, we ended with real people. They had at their disposal a team of talented people from around the country that could create these stories. And it went from like journalism, brand storytelling to marketing, and it doesn't really even exist anymore. And it's astonishing to me how many times that happens. And in this case, I think realistically what happened was that they were interested in only one thing, which is the thing we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, which was they bought the company because we had won this client, and they wanted that to be able to have that client logo on their website as a client that was theirs. And there's this, like, I don't know, you probably haven't heard of it, but there's this movie, and it's a hockey movie. It's called The Mighty Ducks, and it came out a long time ago. In fact, one of the teams in the NHL is called the Ducks. It used to be called the Mighty Ducks, and it was because of this movie. But there's a scene where a lawyer, this guy, he gets Emilio Estevez, I think that's what it is, gets in trouble. He gets like a DUI, so he has to do community service. So he helps this like disheveled local hockey team to like, because he was an ex-hockey player, and his boss is this kind of like mean-spirited lawyer, and they end up sponsoring the team. And there's this moment where he goes into his boss after his boss has like pulled some not cool moves, and he said, like, you may have like gotten this jersey, but you didn't earn this jersey. And I think that reminds me of that moment in time, because I think a brand can buy another brand or product or service or a company, whatever like that, but they didn't build it. They don't really. And I've also been through examples when something I've worked on has been acquired, and it's been acquired thoughtfully, and the company that's acquired it has created additive value to it. Like, they saw that they didn't have it, they needed it, and they actually had the resources that we didn't have before, and they're there to help make it better, not just like scrap it for parts. And so I don't know if that's a long-winded way of answering your question. I think the failure is sometimes, as creatives, like, we have to be optimists. We're creating things for the future. We have to have hope. We have to have belief. And sometimes we believe we need to be, maybe, I don't know, I don't even want to say like more realistic about the business environment, because it's just tricky. It kind of it's a humanity thing. I think I feel bad for all the people whose stories could have been told, and originally the intent of the company was to help people, whether that led to like decrease in employee theft or decrease in turnover, things that cost companies a lot of money from like employee benefit side. But at the end of the day, like, they had a community of people who truly loved that company because of their perception of what that company was bringing them. And I think the stories were such a big part. And so it's very difficult, I think, especially today, that, like, I'll have a conversation with someone, and I'll be like, okay, this is like a photographer we should use, and it can tell the story, or this is illustrator that we should use, and they'll be like, well, can I just send me their portfolio, I'll just toss it into the AI engine, and we'll just generate something. And I understand from a cost perspective, obviously, right? But But at the end of the day, like robots are not reading stories to feel something, to buy something. Humans are. And I think we need to, I think there's a very, and in my world, when I started, like we had a publisher and the publisher paid for the magazine or someone paid for the magazine, but our audience was the reader. Like it was a direct train from the thing we made to the thing that got consumed. And there's a few curved tracks along the way with advertising and thing, you know, as there always are. But at the end of the day, someone would pick up the thing, they would read it, they would literally either email or send us a post mail and say, wow, this article, I really loved it or I really hated it. You know, people still, we've been telling stories from the beginning of time. Like, when was the last time you ever heard a story about, you know, a robot rolling into a cave, being moved by something that's on the side of a cave? We're creating stories for humans. If we use AI and these things to enhance and make those stories better, fine. But the stories are richer because the photographer, the illustrator, the filmmaker we hire, that every single person on this planet comes with a story that no other person can say they have, right? And when you take all those things and you put them into an aggregator, then you're getting the average. And you know, our job is to help brands separate, not aggregate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're not the auto sum button in Excel.
No, yeah, no. And who want, like, and I would argue on the flip side, and it's, and I've used, you know, I've done campaigns. I did a campaign like 2 years ago where we used AI for the concepting for an animated campaign, and it wasn't there yet. But when it came to production, so we used AI successfully to visualize characters, but when it came to production, we had to create those characters from scratch in the actual application that could be used for production. So I think it can be used. I had a client they're a pretty well known landscape architecture firm, and we were doing like a complete reimagination of the brand. And one of the things that was interesting was that it reminds me of your question at the beginning, like, have you like done anything with a pen and a pencil today? And I was going through their materials and their website and everything, and I noticed that there was this huge gap between how they visualize projects. When you see them on the website, it's like it's literally a sketch or it's the final photograph, but there's no renderings, right? And a danger, like in architecture, is a client who says, I don't know, I'll know it when I see it. I really want a rendering. I kind of want to know what it's going to look like before it's done. You know what I mean? And the danger of the rendering or the AI output is that it sort of artificially handicaps an outcome because you've crystallized the finish line, but you're still in the process of creating. And in talking to this client, you know, they use sketching to say sort of like, you could go through this door or you could go through this door, you know, but they're not saying that once you get through that door that the answer is there. And I saw this thing, I think it was the guy who founded the TED Talks, and he was in this documentary of the Eames, Charles and Ray Eames, and he said, you know, you hire me or someone, or you'd hire the Eames for the journey of going from not knowing to knowing, right? Like, so you're getting on the train, you're not really sure where the end is, but you want to be on the train with that crew because you have a belief that this culture of people together can create something that you can't create by yourself. And I think that is something that I sort of like think about when I think about what we're in right now. It's the same thing, honestly, that I thought about even before AI, which is like, if a client says, hey, we're going to do this project and it's going to be all about, you know, this thing, the first thing I would always do is I'd go on to like Getty or whatever, and I'd type in that thing and I'd see all the search results and I'd print them out and I'd put them up on the wall, and then the team would come in and I'd say, this is the thing that everybody thinks about when they think about this thing. We're not going to like, this is, and then put like a big X through it and say like, we're not going to start here. And I think that's the same thing with AI, is like, you kind of use it as a way to think about the cliche of the thing, to then figure out where your new starting point is. And so people say it is a tool, but it can be a tool in a different way, I think, than maybe people are pushing it as, which is it could be an answer, but it could be an answer in a way that people aren't thinking about. An answer in a way of not just like, don't use it, but use it in a way to figure out how to go the complete opposite direction. It's not actually the answer, right? Always. So I think it's just, for me, I would rather pick up the phone and, talk to an illustrator on the phone and solve that problem together, or at least give them sort of the minimal ingredients and let them bring their own flavor to it and then bring it through. People will pay. It's weird. People will pay for things like, oh, we'll pay for a subscription to OpenAI, and then when you tell them like how much natural resources that they're using or whatever, or the actual cost to hire someone that's a real human being that has a portfolio, I think a lot of times the conversation never gets far because we need to like stand up for our community and show people, what humans can do.
There's so many things that are resonating with earlier parts of this discussion in what you're saying right now. The connection to people, but also really strongly the journey, and that idea of it's not the end result. And really, like, the thing that comes to mind as you're talking is exactly that. It's exactly the journey. If you think about a movie, you go and watch a movie and the thing that's brilliant about a movie isn't the end. Even in the ones where there's a twist ending, the only reason the twist ending works is because the journey was crafted so well to throw you off the scent before you got to the ending. It's never the end that is the thing that you talk about, right? You don't go, and even when it is a twist ending, it's because of everything that's happened before. It's because of that journey. And I think you're absolutely right. And I've been saying this a lot in these discussions about AI and what's happening, that as humans, especially as creatives, no matter whether you're trying to come up with a brand or a digital product or whatever it might be, our goal is to tell a story that elicits an emotional response that drives a behavior, right? So if it's to buy something or to subscribe or to come back and revisit, we have to elicit that emotional response in the work that we're producing. And the only way we get to know how to do that, how to master the ability to tell a story that elicits that, is through going that journey ourselves, right? Is through putting the hours in, putting the work in, and trial and error and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. So I love that. Sadly, we're coming up on time. So I have one final question. I could honestly, and I've said this to you before, but I could sit and chat with you for days on end. But I have one final question. It's the same question that I ask every single guest at the end. Lou, are you still awaiting approval?
I don't think so. I think I've always been someone who is do it and then ask for forgiveness later. I think I always tell folks that our biggest strategic advantage is that you have to really learn. You have to figure out the brand you're working on or the problem you're working on, and then you have to find, like, it's like in Jurassic Park. You just need like one strand of DNA to use to defend permission to do something different. You know what I mean? And I told this story on Rebel podcast about the stop motion project I did over in London, and I went in and I did this whole pitch, and I was like showing references, and some of the references were from like Grand Budapest Hotel and Isle of Dogs, and I get to the end, and like I'm literally in with the CEO, and we get to the end, and the CEO is like, "Who's Wes Anderson?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm totally," and then like literally what happened, which is the conversation was basically like, look, we need to launch this thing, and it was like October, and it's June or July. It's like, I don't really care how you do it. I don't need to go behind the curtain. I just need like TV in market because I've paid for this time. You know what I mean? And so sometimes time is actually the part in the brief that can help you the best, because time condenses distractions and concerns about other oh, we're going to do that. And so sometimes in terms of waiting for approval, it's like figuring out how can you use the brief itself is a design problem, I think. And so I start there and then I figure out like, how do I use the brief to get approval, and then I think one really important thing, and I've talked about this a lot on other podcasts, is you have to invent sometimes a role like a cast member for a client to be participating. You don't want to do the whole project and get to the end and be like, ta-da. Like the client has to get on the train at the beginning and they have to travel with you. And I think a lot of times they're just, again, they're not asked, right? And so they don't expect. And I think when a client becomes part of the collaboration in a strategic and thoughtful way that makes sense, you have to protect your team, but you have to protect the work, but it's not, at the end of the day, when a consumer watches something, they don't think of, that's probably the thing that the client did, and that's probably the thing that the production company did. They just view that, like to your point, they get to the end of the movie and they're like, oh, this was brilliant. This was Shawshank Redemption, or this was, Space Jam. Right. They just have a consensus about what they've seen. They don't get to see behind. So I think it's our job to not think of people as creative people or business people or client people or production people, whatever. Like, it's like, find the best possible people that you can afford at that time, who are the right diverse group of people who are going to challenge and make the work better, which includes the client, and get those people gathered and don't just be a passenger on the train. Like, you need to conduct, you need to engineer, you need to lead, you need to see ahead of the curve. And then you get great people. I think you're halfway there.
I think that's a brilliant way to look at it, and a fantastic way to leave, because there's so much more that comes off of that. I think this, I want to sort of classify this episode as Lou Maxon Part 1, right? And we'll come back to this. Before we finish,
another journey.
Exactly. Before we finish, like, how can people get in touch with you? Where do you want people to see specifically something about you or work you've done, or how they can work with you?
Yeah. So, the easiest way, my website just is loumaxon.com, loumaxon.com. If folks are interested in contacting me, they can contact me that way. I'm Maxon House on Instagram. If people are interested about trains and our train project, our architecture project, that's maxonhouse.com or maxonrailway.com. I think if you get on the Google machine and type in my name, you're pretty much going to find there's a lot of stuff floating around there. If our clients are interested in sort of going on this adventure, then the best way is probably just to go to my loumaxon.com website, hit the contact form, or email me at lou@maxonhouse.com. And, I say on the website that I'm interested in like crafting brands and projects for curious, creative, and collaborative clients. And it used to be that, we chased after the brands, but I think we all realized after a while that brands aren't real things. So you can work on a great brand with a horrible person. You want to cast and find great people. Great people are curious people, like creative people are too. And people want to do great work. The right people will want to do great work. And that's the people you want as clients.
I love that. Lou, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I'm sure people listening are going to get a lot from this.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Awaiting Approval. If you're a creative leader or stepping into a leadership position and want support that's honest, practical, and tailored to you, I'd love for you to come and join my Supercharged Creative Leaders Program. It's a 4-week course built around 8 pre-recorded modules, 4 live sessions with me and the rest of your cohort, a private Slack space for you to ask questions and go deeper together, plus ongoing access to my alumni community once you complete the course. Each cohort is capped at just 6 people, so you'll always get personal attention, real feedback, and space to grow. And if you want to tailor the journey further, you can book extra one-to-one sessions with me, and we can dig deeper into the challenges you're facing right now. I built this program based on everything I wish I'd known when I started leading creative teams. No fluff, no jargon, just the tools, frameworks, conversation, and clarity that will actually move you forward. Spots go quickly, so if this sounds like the right fit for you, go to growwithadamjennings.com to book your place on the next cohort. Previous attendees have gone on to win major pitches, land new roles, get promoted, and step into leadership with more clarity, confidence, and purpose. You can find out more and book your place on the next cohort at growwithadamjennings.com. I can't wait to start working with you. Awaiting Approval is a Cordial Fox production, hosted by Adam Jennings, produced by Adam Jennings and Jasmine Egner.